Hi, I'm Charlotte, and thank you for stopping by on my channel. Today I decided that I would answer some questions from a tag. Well, it is technically my second book tag because the first one was the BookTube newbie tag, and I wasn't sure what to do, and so I thought that this tag would be nice because it would allow me to tell you about some authors I like a lot, which I haven't talked that much about until now, and also some books that I loved for specific reasons from the last couple of years and even before. Although I think most of those are from the last couple of years. This tag was originally created by. Well, did I tell you what the tag was? I don't think so. The tag is the literary fiction tag, and it was created in 2019 by Jasmine Reed. So thank you very much to her for thinking about those questions and putting this tag together. And I will put a link to her original video in the description. All right, and I think let's just start with it. The first question of this tag is, how do you define literary fiction? And this is for sure a difficult one, and I think that's why it is a question of this tag. I've said it before, but in my original language, in my mother tongue, in French, literary fiction doesn't exist. It's not a term that is used. And so I found out that literary fiction was a thing when I started getting interested in BookTube, and then I started looking up titles of my favorite books to see under which category they fell, to see a little bit what kind of booktubers I should follow if I wanted to get similar recommendations. And then I realized most of the books I've read and loved in the last few years, since I started reading adult books, really are literary fiction. And so I kind of had to backward engineer what I thought literary fiction was. And so I would say that for me, as far as I understand, literary fiction encompasses books which somehow try to put some kind of emphasis on the writing style in order to convey a story, emotions, some kind of insights. And this can lead to very kind of specific, unusual, very remarkable writing styles, or just a very efficient and deliberate use of language in the writing. Typically, but not always, literary fiction focuses on the internal lives of the characters, or try to contextualize the stories into more broader topics or issues, I would say. So it can happen that the plot gets a little bit in the backdrop of the fiction, of the writing. But it's not always the case, as far as I know. Like, some of the books I'm going to tell you about are very plotty books. Some people might not consider them as literary fiction, but I do. And I couldn't really explain to you better why I do, but I think it's because of the way writing is used and the way it tries to somehow approach more cerebral topics. But it doesn't have to be snobbish, or it doesn't have to be on the nose. It's just that it somehow integrates those topics into the stories. I think I'm going to stop here with this question. I don't know if it was very clear, but I think it's kind of a cloudy term. And I think it can be understood by many different people in many different ways. I'd say similarly in French, there is something which we call littérature, literature. And this refers to novels that somehow, novels, or it could be poems, it could be plays potentially, that somehow put some kind of effort or put special attention to the act of writing, to the style, to that do not consider only the written word as a medium to convey information, but try to add to it some kind of care, some kind of artistry into the writing itself. But again, that sounds super snobbish, and I think that a lot of books of literature or literary fiction are not snobbish stories, and are also not stories that need you to focus primarily on the writing style itself. So that's it. That's all I can come up with. And I hope somehow it is semi-articulate, and I will try to edit it in a way that makes it make sense. All right, let's get to the next questions, which are book recommendation questions. First question is, I think, name a literary fiction book which gives a great character study. And for this, I picked one of my all-time favorite novels, and it is Sweet Caress by William Boyd. Not a great cover, I'd say, but what a great book. I love William Boyd. I've read a few of his novels. I'd say 4 or 5. I still have a lot to go. I think I have at least 2 of his novels in my TBR that I just pick up whenever I feel like it. And he is typically, I don't know if everybody would consider him a literary fiction writer, because his style is quite, I'd say it's very classic, it's very easy to read. And his stories are very plotty. But what I think he does every time, at least every time I've read him, is he's so good at making his characters believable, making them feel like they have rich interior lives, and like they are like jumping out of the page into your brain. Sweet Caress itself is the story of Amory Clay. She is a photograph reporter who lives throughout the 20th century, and because of her job travels through mostly Europe. No, not only, she also goes to the US, I think. Yeah, that's what it says on the back. To cover the events of the 20th century. And we follow her, I think, I don't think it's a spoiler. We follow her more or less until her death. And she feels just so real. She feels like a true person who existed. There are in the book some photographs that are referred to as her photographs, so they have legends. And it makes her feel real. I don't know how else to say it. I finished the book and I thought, oh, this person, Amory Clay, she existed. She was real. If I went on Wikipedia, I would find a whole article on her. And of course, it's not true, but this feeling, it doesn't go away. And it is because of how well it is told. It's because of how real all the relationships feel. And I think that's something that William Boyd just knows how to do. There is another novel which he wrote, a big one, the famous one. I don't remember the name. I will put it somewhere here. That is the story of a man. It's the life of a man. And I heard that it brings the same feelings. I haven't read it yet, I will, but I'm not surprised. He's just a genius at that. And this is all through his writing. And this is because of how masterful he is at talking about human emotions. And so for me, this is kind of the ultimate character study novel. It's great. I love it. Don't get fooled by the cover. This is a fantastic book. If you like you don't even have to like historical fiction. I think this is about a person who happens to live in the past and through historical events. But the reason why it's so good is because of her, because of how she's described. She's a fantastic character. And so yes, this is my pick for question 2. Then question 3 is name a book with that features unique or experimental writing. I typically don't read a lot of experimental writing. It's not something I gravitate towards. If I read a book and it happens to be kind of a more experimental style, it's okay. Like I will probably enjoy it, but it's not something that draws me to a book. And so this book is not really experimental, but it is definitely, I think, unique. And it is Bellefleur by Joyce Carol Oates. I really like Joyce Carol Oates, but I haven't read that many of her novels, especially considering the amount of books she's put out. I think I've read maybe 5 or 6 of her novels. And this is by far the largest one. This is 1,000-page book. And I read this maybe about 10 years ago. It is the first of a trilogy of American Gothic novels, which she wrote in the 1980s. I think this one was written in 1983, something like this. Let me see if I can. 1980 even in English. And it's like a family saga across time, but somehow it doesn't really follow the rules of time. And it kind of runs on and it loops and it meanders through it's 19th century. And it feels so immersive. And that's something that Joyce Carol Oates does, or at least in the books that I have read from her. She's so good at this. She kind of envelops you and she doesn't let you get away. And sometimes she will spend pages on smaller details or on telling you side stories, and then the narration style will jump all over the place, and sometimes you don't really know who's telling the story. Sometimes it's a we, sometimes kind of some omniscient third person. Sometimes you follow a character and you in their head, you jump in and out. In this one, because it's a Gothic story, you jump in and out of kind of fantasy surrealist phases. It's insane. It's an insane book. I heard that she said that this novel was a vampire novel because it sucked out all of her energy when she was writing it. And I have to say, it's a little bit the feeling that it gives you when you read it. It feels like this book is sucking out your energy for you to read it, but it's also such a great experience. It's like nothing else I've ever read before or after. So it's for me unique. I'm sure there are books that are a bit like this or that would remind you of Bellefleur, but for me, I'd say Bellefleur is one of the most unique reading experiences I've ever had. I don't know if I will ever reread it. Like the task at hand, it feels so huge. But I've planned to read this year. I will reread one of the books of the Gothic trilogy. I think it will be A Bloodmore Romance, the second one. I won't talk about it here. I'd say it's less insane, the reading experience, but it's a great story. Ooh, what a great plot it is. Anyway, this is my pick for number 3. Then number 4 is name a literary fiction novel with an unusual structure. For this I picked 10 minutes, 38 seconds in this strange world by Elif Shafak. This was my second novel by Elif Shafak. I read The Bastard of Istanbul also around 10 years ago in the early 2010s. And then I read a review of this one and I picked it up last year. Maybe I read it last year, something like this. Very, very pretty book. I don't have a lot of hardcovers, but this one I felt like it was a good one to have as a hardcover. And I think it's a book that's been read a lot and talked about a lot. But the reason why it has, according to me, an unusual structure is because in this story we follow the hero, Layla. She is a woman who was working as a prostitute in Istanbul, and at the beginning of the novel she's been stabbed by somebody, and her body is left in a trash somewhere in Istanbul. And the title refers to the 10 minutes and 38 seconds, refers to the time in which the body is dead, but the mind stays active of a dead person. And her mind goes back through her life, or through marking moments of her life within those 10 minutes. And so basically, at least the first part of the novel, each chapter, I will try and see if I find. Each chapter starts with how much time the body has been dead and the mind has been going. So this is 2 minutes, so it means it's 2 minutes after the body's death, when the mind is thinking and is going back through the remembrance of Layla's life. And so you get kind of snapshots of her youth, which I think is kind of a strange feeling, because you know this person is dead and yet she feels so full of life, and it's kind of heartbreaking all the way through. I think it's a very impacting story. It makes you think about what it means to be human. Actually, it could also fit with one of the next prompts. And it's also an interesting device to make you jump through Layla's life to the most marking times of her lifetime. Then the next prompt is: name a literary fiction novel that explores social themes. And for this I picked An Unnecessary Woman by Rabih Alameddine. This is a novel set in Lebanon, in Beirut, in which we follow an older woman who is kind of a recluse and who works. She basically does translation of Western classics of Western literature into Arabic, if I'm not wrong. And the reason why I think this book explores social themes and why I picked it is because I think it is a very sensitive and beautiful and often touching and sad look at what it means to become old, and how it takes you away from society. And I think this is a topic that transcends. Of course, this book is also very much related to Beirut and Lebanon and the history of the country. And this has an impact, a huge impact on the life of the main character. But I think this feeling of being taken away from society as an old person is something that is quite universal. And it is not that often explored in novels. And in this case, I think it's just a beautiful portrait. It doesn't make her... She's a complex character. She's not always likable, or she sometimes takes... Yeah, she has her very, very personal, very clear opinions of things, and you might not always agree with her. But I think that's also what makes her so human, and what makes her story and her isolation so what makes it so easy to sympathize with her. And I really, really liked this book. I kind of had to get into it, but once I finished it, I realized how much I loved it, and it's a book that is staying with me. I think I read it 2 or 3 years ago, and it's always somewhere in a corner of my mind. Then the next prompt is name a literary fiction novel that explores the human condition. And I think there are lots of literary, actually for all these prompts, there are a lot of books that would fit the prompt. And in this case, I chose to go back again to one of my favorite authors, who is Kate Atkinson, and I chose A God in Ruins. For me, this book is ultimately about what it means to be a human. It is pretty clear. It has a plot. It has a very interesting plot. It talks about Teddy, who worked as a pilot. He's British. He worked as a pilot during World War II. And then we follow him as he gets married. And then we follow his daughter and his grandchildren and the relationships they have with each other. This novel is a companion novel to Life After Life by Kate Atkinson. Teddy is the brother of Life After Life's protagonist, Ursula. I also love Life After Life. I also think it kind of explores the human condition, but I think in this one it is very obvious that it does. It's a book about what it means to be a human, and most especially what it means to be a human related to other humans, and how the lives of the people around us, especially when it comes to family, influence our lives and the way we feel, and how pains and difficulties are transmitted through filiation. And it is a book that is sometimes so, it brings, I think, hopelessness. It's sometimes it's desperate, this book, because people are unable to communicate with each other, and they get isolated in their own pain that is kind of repeating itself through generations. Sometimes it felt terribly sad, I thought, but it felt also very real. And there, as always with Kate Atkinson, lots of parts you have to laugh, because she's genuinely funny author, and usually not for after it will be absolutely heartbreaking. And that's also a little bit how life is. The funny parts and the terrible parts kind of randomly happen one after the other, and you cannot do anything against it. So in this way, I think this book feels like life, and I love it. I think it's a great story, very well written. Again, I'd say like maybe William Boyd. It's not. Yes, there is a style. There is definitely a style. There is an intentional way of telling the story, but it is not something. I don't know. It doesn't feel like it's not particularly elaborate, or it doesn't feel. I don't know. It's not a book I would read for the style, but I think how good she is at writing makes this book powerful, if that makes sense. Then the 7th prompt is to name a literary fiction novel that is a hybrid of literary fiction and genre, a genre novel. And for this, I picked Rainbirds by Clarissa Goenawan. This novel is I think it is a hybrid. It is a pretty well-mixed hybrid of literary fiction and a mystery novel. It is a story set in Japan of a young man whose sister was murdered. And so they were kind of estranged. And he goes back to the place where she lived, to the city where she lived, to find out what happened to her. And he kind of he lives at her place. He goes to work at the place where she works. He kind of inserts himself into the life of his dead sister. And this book covers, of course, it covers the mystery, but you almost don't realize it because of how introspective a novel it is. You are in, the hero is called Ren, and you are a lot in his feeling, in his thought process. It goes back to his relationship with his sister. It observes all the people who interacted with his sister, and Ren, of course, has then his own relationship with them, and he imagines the relationship that they had with his sister. And it feels like a very introspective literary fiction novel. And yet, somehow, almost, it doesn't feel real. Somehow you also get to find out what happened to the sister. And you go through almost a traditional plot of a mystery novel. I found this really masterful. I found this very good. I read a number of literary mysteries, but never one that felt like this. There are quite a lot of content running about this book, so I would recommend that you look them up if you are thinking of reading it. But I found it very unique, very interesting, and for me, this is kind of a perfect hybrid as far as literary mysteries go. Now, for this prompt, I also wanted to show you one more book. And it is a book that I was planning on reading in February, but I won't. For some reason, I will read it in March. It is a novel by probably my favorite mystery author, Fred Vargas. She's a French writer. She writes literary mysteries that feel very different from from Rainbirds. They are very quirky, very witty. They definitely feel like mysteries a lot more. But I think the attention put to the characters and it's a book where there are musings, people muse, if that is a term that fits here. It's not, you don't follow through a straightforward story. And there are a couple of series. This one is the Commissaire Adamsberg series. So it's this man called Jean-Baptiste Adamsberg who solves crimes. And he is kind of the anti-Sherlock Holmes. As in, he doesn't really deduce anything. He kind of gets an input of information about the crime. And then his brain, I don't know, it's almost like a meditative process. His brain kind of turns everything around, and then he gets kind of intuitions of what makes sense and what doesn't. But somehow it feels, I think it's great to read. But I think also this kind of very strange process makes it sort of a more literary version of a mystery book. Anyways, I won't tell you anything about the plot, mostly because I haven't read it yet. But I'm thinking of making maybe a reading blog about it, because it's always a joy to read her books. And I think those are also, in a very different style, very, very good literary fiction and mystery hybrids. All right, I have to move my camera a little bit, but let's get to the last prompt. So the last prompt is a question, and it is, which genre do you wish was mixed with literary fiction more? And for this genre, I would say, I'd say my favorite probably mix is are literary mysteries. I think those are great. But a genre which I wish was mixed more are biographies. Non-fiction, but especially biographies, literary biographies. I think I've only read one, and this is The Story of Chicago May by Nuala O'Fuellen. And this is a fictionalized biography of Chicago May, who was a woman who came from Ireland and then moved to the United States in the 19th century. Yes, in the late 19th century, and who became a con artist and a criminal. And I love this story so much because it was a perfect mix of telling us the true story of a fascinating woman and also using literary style to make the story engaging. There is a narrator's voice in this story, which I loved. And it made, I think, to me, it elevated the whole biography to another level. Sometimes I get a little bored by nonfiction. Like, that's a fault of mine. It has nothing to do with nonfiction as a genre. But I kind of need someone to tell me the story. And I don't read a lot of memoirs, but I feel like I would like memoirs because they have narrative voices when they're well made. But I think this option of talking about historical figures or people who could not tell their own story for some reason, or maybe, actually, I think Chicago May is a bad example because she did write a memoir that came out. But this way of contextualizing it is very interesting, and having some attention given to the style and using typical trope of literary fiction, like making it it is an introspective novel. It is a novel that looks at the human condition and that explores social themes and basically all of those topics that we talked about in the last few novels, but still tells you the real story of a real woman. And I think it's great, and I wish there were more books like this because I think I would love them. If you know any, please let me know. I would be very happy to give them a try. Okay, and I think that was this for this tag. I had a lot of fun doing it. It allowed me to talk about some books I loved, and some of them I haven't read in a while. Some of them I haven't read in about 10 years, but it was nice to get back to them and to think again about them and to think about how I would summarize them and what made them so special for me. And I hope that this was interesting for you. I'm looking forward to see you back on my channel. And until then, goodbye.